tiny jack. I'm going to put him back right away. Just in case anybody's wondering, this is my happy face. When you've been messing around with something in a kind of dark and damp cellar for weeks, and you finally get it out, get it in some water and catch a bloody fish, it's kind of all really worth it. But I'm going to have a sit down for a bit of a relax, and then see if I can find something else, maybe a bit bigger, but I don't really care. One of the problems I knew I'd have to face at some point would be cutting a straight joint in a very round layer body. The solution I came up with was to turn it back into a square object by making a case, and for that I relied on the pins I'd added to the moulds that marked the centre line of the layer body. I started out by cutting down some 3x1 plain timber to a little over the length of the layer. I also cut down some beading that was fractionally thicker than half the width of the body. These are placed tight to the front and back of the larger blocks, and used a small amount of hot glue to hold them in position. I also attached a thinner piece of bead that I'd ripped down on the bandsaw to the bottom. This all held a template so I could position the blank body and temporarily glue it in with some super glue. I could then remove the template and add another small strip of bead to the top. To keep the base secure to the wood, I pumped in a lot of hot glue to fill in the gaps behind it. Once the glue had hardened up, I could snip away the excess wire. And then, using another template and a small drill, I made some pilot holes for the weight holes and hook hanger positions. The other side of the outer shell I made the same way, as a mirror image. And then to bring them together, I used the flat bandsaw table and the mitre guide with its slot to set up one side accurately. Then I could fill the other side with glue and just press both sides together, keeping everything square until the glue set up. To mark the cutting lines, I drew up another template and worked off that, using a square to carry those lines down the side, and also remembering to shade the area I wanted to remove. To actually make the cuts, I used the sled setup I'd made for the bandsaw. This started out life as a piece of 1/2-inch plywood. To make it run along the table, I took some measurements from the mitre slot and cut a strip of plastic from a kitchen chopping board. This needed a little planing just to get a good fit. After adding some countersunk screw holes, I used a speed square and some screws to secure it to the plywood. Despite the planing, it was a little loose, so I added some double-sided tape with the waxed backing on to shim up the gap, which seemed to work well, so I cut a slot in the plywood as a guide. For a fence, I used a piece of 2x1 softwood and kind of guessed its position. I then added a screw from the underside so I could adjust its angle. To line this up for the first cut, I used another paper template and again hot glued the back of the fence into position. I could then slide the case along so the blade met the first cutting line, and then add a stop block to the fence with a bit more glue. To give myself a little more control over the cutting speed, I added a sash clamp to the table so I could slowly wind the sled into the cut rather than pushing all the way by hand. And then, kind of nervously, I made the first cut. I did take some of the beads out so I could see the body inside the case. Once I'd reached the centre line, I could flip it over and make the second cut to separate the two pieces. For the rear, I changed the angle and set up the fence and stop block in a similar way, and then repeated the cuts. On the rear, I added a slight round over with a file and then just cleaned up. I could then drill pilot holes for a pair of screw eyes that would make one part of the hinge. These I twisted into place and then transferred their positions to the rear section. I used these marks on the bandsaw to cut slightly wider slots that would give some play. For the pin of the hinge, I drilled a hole about 4mm back from the edge. And then, just as a test, added a short piece of wire, and everything seemed okay. I then took the pieces back to the press and drilled out all the holes for the weights. After breaking out the pieces from the case, I added a slot for the tail. The tail itself I cut out from some silicone baking sheet that I bought from IKEA. To hold it in place, I added a couple of pins and some drops of super glue. I drilled out for some soft toy eyes and just pushed them into position with a bit more super glue. For the pin wire, I added some bend so I could take it into the weight holes to hopefully add a little strength. Then I gave it another test just to make sure everything was moving okay. I then filled the weight holes with a lead-based solder until the layer just floated, but I guess the weight of a leader would give it a slow sinking action. As an afterthought, I added a dorsal fin that I made from some polycarbonate, as I noticed in testing the layer had a bit of a roll, and hopefully this would cure it. To give the blank a proper test, I thought I'd go all international and take it with me on a trip that I'd planned for a while to Ireland. The idea was to spend a few days fishing and filming with Matt Check of Mel Layers, who's an amazing layer maker and fisherman. And it was a real inspiration to see his work, the kind of detail and precision, and just the time and effort he puts into his layers right the way through from the kind of design to fishing them. So I did feel a little embarrassed bringing a blank layer, but I did manage to catch the smallest fish in the lake, and also something slightly bigger. But the real purpose of the trip was to make that short film about Matt Check, and hopefully that'll be on the channel pretty soon. Next time on the vlog, I should be making the blank a little more fishy. Thanks for watching.
If you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share or leave a comment. I'm also running a Patreon campaign if you'd like to take a step further and support the channel with an ongoing donation. To see more handmade fisherman videos, click on the channel link or subscribe to be notified of future videos. Thanks for watching.